Welcome back again to our time of reflection on faith and the coronavirus pandemic. What's the faith perspective on our coronavirus pandemic? We talked a lot on Monday about the natural desire to reflect. Secondly, we talked about what religious faith brings to that. And yesterday we talked about how religious practice is involved in that, and particularly the parts of our religious practice that are so important to us that, in fact, we're missing them these days. Tonight, I'd like to talk about what opportunities for a growth in our faith are being offered to us in this pandemic experience. As I said earlier, this experience has disrupted and affected everything in our lives, every dimension of our lives. But it's also made possible, and I really believe this, some unique opportunities in the first place here tonight to grow in our faith, to really get a sense, who is God for me? I may have experienced God in one way throughout my life, maybe a couple of different ways, but boy, being in this experience has opened up a whole other angle on who God is. It's like if you have a good friend and you have a lot of different experiences with them, and let's say something really life-threatening happens. They save you from when your house was on fire or something like that. You look at that friend in a whole different way. You see something in that friend differently. What do you see in God differently these days? What is your image of God? Is this moving you beyond that old man with the long gray beard, or whatever else, whatever kind of image of God you might have had? I know, we all know, in a time like this, more than ever, that we have a deep desire for God, but also a deep need for God in my life. I need the church, and I need the community of believers. I need the scriptures. I need Mass and the Eucharist in order to nourish my relationship with God. My relationship with God is there because God's always present in my life, but I'm not always aware of it or alert to it or too good at being faithful to it. And so I need the help of the sacraments and the Eucharist and the scriptures to keep me on track. How do I pray now? Is the way I'm praying changing as a result of being in the midst of this pandemic? And really, what does it mean to follow Jesus? Really, huh? Not just, I'll follow Jesus. No, what does it really mean to follow Jesus? I'd like to suggest that this pandemic experience, we can look at it like a retreat. Now, when people go on retreat, they step away from their normal rhythm of life. Maybe they go to a retreat house or wherever, but sometimes they just stay at home and they don't do a lot of the other things that they would normally do, things that would distract them. They spend the time of retreat focusing on God, on their relationship with Jesus, and on what Jesus is calling them at that point in time to be. I'd like to suggest that this pandemic experience can be like a retreat. We all have a little more time on our hands than we had before. How are you using that to help you grow more aware of God's presence and more aware of the things that really matter? I suggest that would be a great way to really spend these days, or even just to view them in that way. It's difficult to be aware of this dimension of our life and our faith, obviously, in the midst of so much anxiety and disruption and real disorientation that so many people are feeling. That in itself is distracting. So it may sound kind of strange to say, let's think of this as a retreat, a focused time to be alert to God. It's difficult. I certainly believe that. But we can use this experience to become more aware that we cannot control the uncontrollable. The pandemic teaches us that attitude of life is a futile one, and it's not going to lead us to any kind of success. And so maybe even in this reflective time, I come to appreciate how true that is. But if I can concentrate on being in control of the part of reality that's been entrusted to me, and that in some sense depends upon me. Things like how I use my time, how I care for myself, my own health and well-being, how I care for my family and my friends, how I pay attention to my relationship with God. If I can focus on that, those things that I have some say over, then I can find that my anxiety might diminish a bit. It's a great opportunity, in other words, and I think this is really key, it's a great opportunity to trust God. Now we can say easily, oh yeah, I trust God. I trust God. No, I mean, I trust God, let's say in a situation like this. Trust is really the essence of faith. Faith means I look straight at God and I say, I trust you. I trust you. And I trust that you're being faithful to me now, even in these extraordinary circumstances. So what's one spiritual practice that you have used, or maybe even just thought about using, maybe you even got to doing it, that you've used or thought about using in these days to help you stay aware of God's presence and God's faithful love for you? Is it a special way of praying? Is it wearing a particular medal? Is it carrying around your rosary in your pocket? Is it coming to these reflections in the weekday evenings? Is it just saying special prayers? Who knows what it is? Is there some spiritual practice that you've used these days or have thought about using and may even start after this? And what's one element of spiritual growth that you've noticed about yourself in these days? These past 6 weeks have been a time of real upheaval and disorientation. But that can also be a time when I come to grow and mature in my relationship with God. So a spiritual practice that you've been using or thinking about using, or one element of spiritual growth that's happened in these days. Let's take a minute. Once again, if you are free to and would like to, just in a couple of words, type it out in the chat column. Sometimes I think one of the values of asking questions like this are when somebody actually puts me to the wall and says, "What is one spiritual practice you're doing lately?" I may think of something that I hadn't even been thinking about. I never saw that as a change of religious practice or a difference in my prayer life or whatever it was, whatever it is. I hope the questions were helpful to you, because I think when we try to answer questions like this, when we try to answer questions about our inner life, our spiritual life, when we try to wrap words around them, we get in touch in a better way with what's actually going on in us and how we're growing and things like that. Here's another great quote from the American Trappist monk, Thomas Merton. He said, "You do not need to know precisely what is happening or exactly where it's all going." Parenthesis, doesn't that describe this pandemic, huh? But he goes on, "What you need is to recognize the possibilities and the challenges that are offered by the present moment and to embrace them with courage, with faith, and with hope." You don't need to know what's happening or exactly where it's all going. Wouldn't we love that kind of control of our lives? To be able to say, I know exactly where my life is going and where I'm going to be 5 years from now. But Merton says what you need to do is to recognize all the possibilities and all the challenges that are offered by the moment that you're in right now and embrace them with courage, with faith, and with hope. As we wrap things up, as we have the other nights, I'd like to leave the opportunity for you to jot down a quick question or something that may have come up in your own personal reflection, conversations you're having about what we're talking about here, different ways you've thought about things. So if you have one of those questions, just put them down in the chat column and let's see if we can get a little Q&A going here to help us understand this mysterious phenomenon even more. Thanks very much.